Well, on Sunday nights when we get together, we're in the midst of a series on several of the personal encounters of Jesus. And I again want to encourage you, if you have a personal encounter of Jesus that you'd like for me to preach a lesson on, let me know. And do that as soon as possible so that it can be worked into the series. This week we're going to continue talking about encounters of Jesus by talking about Jesus' encounter at the well, or Jesus' encounter with the Samaritan woman. So if you would open up your Bibles to John chapter 4. In this encounter of Jesus, there are there's a series of actions, if you will, that take place in this story and make up the story, as a matter of fact. The preliminary actions of Jesus that sort of set the story up. Then there is the main interaction of Jesus and the woman at the well. And there's a small distraction by the disciples. And finally, a great reaction from the people of the town. But first, let's take a look at what John has to say about the story by looking at John chapter 4, verses 1 through 30. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And as he had to pass through Samaria, so he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God, and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I give him will become in him a spring of water, welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where we ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." Just then his disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why are you talking with her?" So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, "Come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" They went out of the town and were coming to him. Now let's skip down to verse 39. Many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. "He told me all that I ever did." So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. And they said to the woman, "It is no longer because of what you have said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world." Now the story begins, of course, with Jesus' preliminary actions, verses 1 through 9, that set up the story, that set up the encounter that he is about to have. Now what are some of these preliminary actions? Well, he went through Samaria. In fact, the text says he had to go through Samaria. Now that in and of itself shows you that Jesus is acting with a purpose. Because you see, most Jews, when they were going from Galilee to Judea or Judea to Galilee, most Jews had to go around Samaria. Most Jews wouldn't go through Samaria. What they would do is they would cross the Jordan River in either Galilee or Judea, and then walk on the east side of the east bank of the Jordan River until they could cross the river again and set foot in Galilee or Judea, so as not to set foot in Samaria. That's how bad their disdain for Samaritans was. And most Jews wouldn't go through Samaria. They would go around. And if they did go through Samaria for some odd reason, or they accidentally did, or they were in a hurry, or what have you, they wouldn't stop for sure. They wouldn't hang around. They wouldn't go into the town to support their local economy with buying anything. Best I can tell you, it'd be kind of like during the height of the Cold War, going on vacation to Moscow and dining at the Kremlin, okay? You just, as a good American, you wouldn't do that. As a good Jew, you would have no dealings with Samaritans because Samaritans were half-breeds. Samaritans were the race of people that resulted from Jews marrying and producing offspring with Gentiles. And that was just not good for the Jews. And so the full-blooded Jews really disliked the Samaritans. Well, he went through Samaria. That's the first thing that sets up the story. The second thing that sets up the story is that he was hot and tired. He was hot and tired, weary from the journey as he was. The day started at 6 a.m. That's when the first hour of the day was. So the sixth hour would be noon. Okay, noon is when the sun is directly overhead, right? Or typically that's when the sun is directly overhead. That would be one of the hottest parts of the day. And so it is the heat of the day. And the way that things worked in Bible times, was that the women would carry large clay pots to the well empty. Their purpose in carrying them to the well empty was they were going to fill them up with water. So something had to be wrong with this woman. It had to be wrong because nice girls would come at dawn and or at dusk because it was cooler then for carrying those clay pots back home. Not only that, there was the social aspect of it. They would go so they could interact with other women from the town. And it was, a little, it's kind of like going to the beauty shop nowadays, okay? You go there and you talk with people and it's all well and good and it's good social interaction. Well, that's what this was. This was social interaction for the ladies of the town. I don't think this woman overslept. Okay, because later on we find out she's had 5 husbands, and the one she now has is not her husband. So obviously there were some problems with the social exercises of this woman. Well, anyway, so he sets up the story first by going through Samaria. And then he was hot and tired, so he sat down by a well. And the third thing he does is he talked to a Samaritan woman. Now, for a Jew who was a male, to associate or talk with a Samaritan male would be bad. I mean, that would be bad enough. But for a Jewish male to speak to a Samaritan woman was unheard of. I mean, most Jews would not even speak to Jewish women in public unless it was their wife or daughter or mother or sister. And even then, those close relatives, even then, there wasn't a whole lot of interaction between men and women of the Jewish persuasion. And for him to ask for a drink was absolutely unspeakable. I mean, she's stunned by it. She can't figure it out. How can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? Now, some versions have a footnote at verse 9 that says something along the lines of, for Jews do not use dishes Samaritans have used. So all of these preliminary actions set up the main interaction between Jesus and the woman. And this main interaction is a lively discussion. Okay? The lively discussion begins with them talking about living water. In verses 10 through 15, Jesus says to her, hey, you know what? If you knew who it was who was asking you for a drink, you would ask me, and I would give you living water. You drink this water, and you'll never be thirsty again. Jesus is focused on the spiritual. She's still shocked and keeps the focus on her dead water. What do you mean? You can't get any water out of the well. It's deep. You don't have anything to draw with and everything. But Jesus continues to keep his focus on the living water, on the spiritual, on what his water is. She still doesn't get it. She is still focused on the physical and says, okay, well, give me some of this water so that I won't get thirsty anymore and I won't have to come and draw water from the well. So I can avoid being seen by others and hearing the snickers and the whispers. Well, Jesus is focused on the spiritual, she's focused on the physical, so Jesus changes the subject. Okay, they go from talking about living water to living life. He says to her, go call your husband and come back. She says, I have no husband. Jesus says, you're right, you don't. You've had 5. The one you now have is not your husband. Marriage was meant to be a one-time only deal. That's the way God designed it in the beginning. That's the way it should still be. And folks, till death do us part used to mean till death do us part. Even if they'd only been dating for a few weeks, or I guess in Bob and Dottie Segert's case, a few days. They met on Monday, got married on Friday or something like that, and they've been together ever since. That's a beautiful story. I don't recommend marrying somebody you just met, though. That kind of can be a little bit risky, more risky nowadays. Anyhow, Sylvester Stallone was being interviewed after Rocky V came out. And as a part of that interview, he made the comment, boxing is great exercise so long as you can yell cut whenever you want to. I mean, if you get tired, you yell cut and it stops, you rest, and then you come back. Well, unfortunately, that's how many people view marriage. It's great so long as you can yell cut whenever you want to. Or, what have you. Till death do us part for now, for many people means until you do something I don't like. Until I stop liking you as much as I like you right now. Until you get older and your looks change and I don't find you attractive anymore. Unfortunately, that's what till death do us part is starting to mean nowadays. It means until something better comes along. Well, this woman had yelled cut 5 times. 5 failed marriages. It doesn't say if it was the husband's fault or if it was her fault. 5 failures. And she was now apparently living with a man who was not her husband. Friends, cut is not an option in a Christian marriage. It's not an option. That's why in marriage ceremonies that I perform, I insist on doing premarital counseling with the couple. And as part of that counseling, we talk about the vows that they are going to say to each other. And I tell them, you're not going to say, till death do us part. Well, why not? I said, well, because you're going to say something different. You're going to say the same thing that Ruth said to Naomi. May the Lord God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. I guess that's why not too many people have asked me to do marriages nowadays. I don't know. Anyway, but anyhow, Jesus lets her know about, he knows a little bit about her and everything, and so now it's her turn to change the subject. They've talked about living water, gone on to living life. Now she wants to talk about living worship. She asks a question, I can see that you're a prophet. I mean, she makes a very astute observation, isn't that? I mean, I can tell that you're a prophet. You have told me something that not too many people know, or maybe you did know. Maybe you've had a spy or something to that effect. I don't know, but you know a lot about me. You must be a prophet. Lots of people think Jesus was just a prophet. Lots of people think that Jesus was just a good man. But I have said before, and I will say probably again, there's only three things Jesus could possibly have been. Number one, he could have been a lunatic. I mean, making the claims that he did had to be a little bit loony, we might say. But how could he do so many great things? Which, remember, that's what Nicodemus came to him and told him, hey, we know no one could do the great things you are doing if God were not with him. How can a lunatic do great things? How can a lunatic attract people to follow him? It just doesn't make much sense. So he wasn't a lunatic, he was a liar then. That's his second option. He was a liar. But would someone die for a lie? I mean, he died. That, people might, think, well, that might be possible. But would other people subsequently die for a lie about him? By the way, he claimed to be the Son of God. If he was a good guy, would a good guy make that claim if it weren't true? So he wasn't a lunatic and he wasn't a liar. He has to be Lord. That is the only option, is that he is who he says he was, and that he was and is who he said he was. So she says, I can see that you're a prophet, and Jesus has me thinking much more than that. So she asks a question about worship. We worship on this mountain. You Jews say you have to worship in Jerusalem. So Jesus talks about true worship. He tells her a little bit about how worship truly is supposed to work, and that true worship is worship that is done in spirit and in truth. And it doesn't matter where it is, whether it's on top of a mountain or in a building or under a tree somewhere. Worship is worship if it is done in spirit and in truth. Location is not important. I'm going to tell you a true story. And I know a lot of people get nervous when they hear a preacher say, this is a true story, because it makes you think that some of their stories aren't really true. Some of my stories aren't totally true. They're kind of like the legends that we mentioned this morning. They got a kernel of truth under there. There's a little bit of fluff and everything. But this is a totally 100% true story, okay? Don't get nervous, okay? Thomas K. Beecher once substituted for his famous brother Henry Ward Beecher at the Plymouth Church in Brooklyn, New York. Many people on that Sunday had come to hear the renowned Henry Ward Beecher speak. So when his brother Thomas appeared in the pulpit instead, there were some people who actually got up and started to leave. Sensing that they were disappointed because he was substituting for his brother, Thomas raised his hand for silence and announced, all those who came here this morning to worship Henry Ward Beecher may withdraw from the church. All who came to worship God may remain. See, it doesn't matter where it is or who is with us when we assemble to worship. God's presence is what makes it special. God's presence is what really matters. And so Jesus corrects her misunderstanding about worship. He talks about living worship. So we've got living water, living life, living worship. This is a lively discussion, isn't it? And it closes with living proof. The Samaritan woman says, I know the Messiah is coming. Well, good for the Samaritan woman. She knows the Messiah is on the way. She at least has some knowledge of what's going on. Well, Jesus says, not only is the Messiah on the way, the Messiah is here. And in fact, He is the one who is speaking to you. And in fact, He says, you're looking at Him. Well, they're just getting into the good part of the interaction when the disciples get back and cause a little bit of a small distraction. Verses 27 through 30. The disciples get back and they've got food with them because they had gone to town to buy food. Knowing the disciples like we know the disciples, they probably wanted to get out of Samaria as soon as possible, if not sooner. They didn't want to be there in the first place. I mean, for Jesus to cut through Samaria was bad. For Him to stop at the well outside of Sychar was even worse. And He told them to go buy food in the town. That just, they were probably very anxious to leave. Especially some of them, who we know were good Jews. Some of them, one of them whom later on, when he has a vision from God on top of a roof, that tells him to eat these unclean animals. Surely not. Nothing unclean has ever entered my mouth. Okay, right, Peter, whatever. Anyway, they probably want to leave as soon as possible. And they get back and Jesus is talking to a Samaritan woman at that. And they're speechless when they see Jesus doing what He's doing. Even Peter. And you know how out of character that is for Peter to be speechless, right? Well, they're all speechless. They don't say anything to him. Well, the woman sees the disciples coming back and she takes off. The woman runs off. In fact, she is in such a hurry to leave, she forgets the water jar. Okay, that was the purpose for her coming. But guess what? She's got a new purpose. Why does she have a new purpose? Because she's had contact with Jesus. Do you ever think about it that way? She forgets all about the water jar and she runs off to tell her the people in the town. I was about to say her friends, but apparently she doesn't have too many friends. But she tells the people in the town what's going on. And while that's going on, I can almost see Judas looking at that water jar, thinking, there might be a collector's market for Samaritan water jars. We ought to take that jar and sell it for whatever we can get for it. And some of the other disciples, if Judas did say something like that, say, you know what, I ain't going to touch that thing. Samaritans been using that. We don't touch dishes Samaritans have been using. And then there's a discussion about food that happens, and Jesus says, I've got food to eat that you don't know anything about. And they think, did somebody bring him some food or what? How does that work and everything? And then this woman who forgets the water jar, she doesn't forget Jesus. Oh no. She doesn't forget Jesus. She's gone out and she's told people in the town, come and see this man who told me everything I've ever done. Could this be the Messiah? And she returns with the townspeople. And the townspeople ask him to stay. And he obliges. He says, sure. And you can almost see the disciples go, oh man. Jesus, that's not the right way to handle this. The right way to say, thank you very much, but I'm out of here. You can hear their sighs when he says, sure, we'll stay. And they stay there for 2 whole days. Where we observe the great reaction by the townspeople, verses 39 through 42. The people initially believe because of the woman's testimony. Come and see a man who told me everything that I've ever done. Could this be the Christ? They believe because of what the woman said. You know, sometimes we just have to take someone else's word for it, don't we? And it happens every day. It happens more than you think it does. Let me give you a great big for instance. We go to a doctor. Maybe we can pronounce their name, maybe we can't. Okay? But anyhow, we go to a doctor and we maybe can, maybe can't pronounce their name. We haven't verified their degrees. Anyone here ever call the university where the diploma says the doctor graduated to make sure that they actually graduated? You ever do that? Probably not. I never have. Okay? So we go to this doctor. We've never verified his or her degrees. He or she gives us a prescription we can't read. Well, of course, now they don't even give you the prescription anymore. They type it into the computer and they email it. So you don't even see the prescription. You know, maybe they tell you what they're giving you, maybe they don't, but it goes to a pharmacist. Okay? And this pharmacist works behind the counter that you can't see what they're doing. You've never verified their degrees from pharmacology school or whatever it is. You've never verified what they're doing is right. They give us, or that they're qualified to do what they're doing, they give us a chemical compound that we don't understand. And we take that chemical compound home and we put it in our mouth and we swallow it. That is sort of scary if you think about it. Ezra's back there saying, don't think about it. Right? But we do it all because some other people who we don't know, whose qualifications we've never verified either, said that the doctor and the pharmacist know what they're doing. That's called belief. We believe the doctor is qualified to write the prescription and the pharmacist is qualified to fill the prescription, and that they're not going to do it wrong or in such a way as to hurt us. We believe that they are they are qualified to do that. Well, the people believe because of what she said. The people have faith because of Jesus' teachings. See, the difference is that faith is their own. You see, eventually you go to a doctor enough times that that doctor begins to have that. We begin to have that faith of the doctor. They earn your trust over time. The pharmacist is the same way. They earn your trust over time. Faith, though, requires action. It's not a noun, it's a verb. It requires us to act on that faith. The people act on that faith. They grow faith in them at the teachings of Jesus. Consider that many years ago it was decided to put a suspension bridge across a wide gorge. It was too far to the bottom to build concrete up to build the bridge that way. So they decided to put a suspension bridge over it. And how are they going to do it? In fact, how could they even start building a bridge over such a wide space? Well, the way they decided to do it, they shot an arrow across the gorge from one side to the other. And that arrow carried across a tiny thread. But the connection was then established. Eventually, that piece of thread was used to pull across twine. And that twine eventually pulled across a rope. And that rope eventually carried across a thicker rope and a thicker rope, until finally they were able to use a rope to pull across the iron chains from which the bridge would hang. Those of us raised in the church, we were born with that tiny thread crossing the wide gulf into eternity. Our parents gave us our faith. But as time went by, we had to develop faith that is our own. We couldn't live forever on our parents' faith. We had to grow, and we had to make a decision for that faith to become our own. And when we make that decision to have faith that's not our own, or that is our own, that we grow into, we have to take action. What an action-packed story. From the preliminary actions of Jesus, which set the story up, to the interaction Jesus has with the woman, to the small distraction the disciples cause, and then the great reaction of the townspeople. Action-packed, exciting story. But you know what? Anytime Jesus is a main character in a story, we can know that it's going to be a great story. Furthermore, we can know that it will call upon us to act as well. See, the same thing is true not just in stories that Jesus is in, but in lives that Jesus is in. If Jesus is involved in your life, it's going to be action-packed. It's going to be exciting, and it's going to call on you to live your life in such a way that will surprise you. But because it's the way He wants you to live your life, it's always going to be a pleasant surprise, and it's always going to have a happy ending. No matter what the trials and pitfalls we have to face in the meantime, it will always have a happy ending, because if we live our lives the way Jesus wants us to live our lives, if we live our lives for Him, then ultimately we will end up in heaven. And that is the very definition of a happy ending. So tonight, if you're not living for Jesus, you need to start. Maybe starting needs to be that initial faith response of being immersed in the watery grave of baptism for the forgiveness of your sins. Maybe you've made that initial response, but things have gotten difficult over time, and you've stopped living your life totally and wholly for Jesus, and you want to start. And maybe you need to pray right where you're at, privately responding. Maybe you need to publicly ask this church to pray with you and to pray for you. Whatever that response is, Jesus in a story always calls for action. Jesus in a life always calls for action. Will you make that action? Will you take that action this evening? And if it involves a public response, why don't you come to the front now as we stand and sing together?